Does sex really end after menopause? A lot of people still act like it does, as if after 50 or 60, desire should quietly disappear. But that idea is not just wrong, Masov. It can be deeply harmful.
After dark, conversations get deeper.
Deep Talk English Podcast. Sex education.
Imagine turning 50 or 60 and being handed this literal medieval certificate.
Right, like a heavy yellowed piece of parchment.
Exactly. Printed on parchment, signed and stamped by society, basically declaring that your sex life is officially over.
Just completely closed for business.
Yes. The moment you hit menopause or blow out those 60 candles, society hands you this document. And you're told, like, your only remaining hobbies are supposed to be pruning the garden or comparing blood pressure meds.
Maybe doting on the grandchildren if you have them.
Right. The cultural message is just so incredibly loud. It's telling you the realm of intimacy, of physical pleasure is just done.
It is, it's an incredibly pervasive narrative. We basically treat human sexuality like a light switch.
Just flip it off.
Exactly, like Father Time just walks into the room and permanently flicks it into the off position. But, the actual biological and medical data, it tells a completely different story.
Completely different. And that's really our mission for this deep dive today, right?
Yeah.
To basically tear up that medieval certificate.
That is exactly the mission. We are looking at a massive stack of research today. I mean, we've got insights from the National Institute on Aging, the Mayo Clinic, the Cleveland Clinic.
Really heavy hitters?
Oh, totally. Alongside all this clinical data from specialized gynecologists and sexologists, we really need to dismantle this frantic 25-year-old script.
The one we just violently force onto mature bodies.
Right. And instead, we're going to explore the real biological, psychological, and practical realities of intimacy after midlife.
So, if you were approaching this life stage yourself, or maybe you're already deep in it, or even if you're just fiercely curious about how human biology actually works over a whole lifetime.
You're going to walk away from this with a really liberating science-backed understanding.
Yeah, we are going to show you how desire doesn't just disappear. It evolves.
It really does.
So let's start with a sheer biological reality versus this big societal myth. Because, if we want to convince ourselves that the body isn't fundamentally broken, we have to look under the hood.
We do. And to do that properly, we actually have to wind the clock way back to the revolutionary work of Masters and Johnson.
Oh, wow. Okay. Taking you back to the 50s and 60s.
Exactly. Think about the cultural climate back then. It was radical enough that they were studying sex at all in a clinical setting.
Right. Highly taboo.
Totally. But they went a step further. They challenged the absolute biggest assumption of their era. They actually brought cameras, sensors, and, clinical behavioral experiments into the lab with older adults.
Like people in their 60s and 70s.
Yes. And what they proved empirically is that there is no biological sentence that dictates an end to pleasure.
Wow.
There is literally no magical age where sexual capacity just switches off.
That is amazing. But I do want to break down what they and our modern sources actually found about those physical changes, because the details are incredibly specific.
Oh, very specific.
Let's look at women's physiology first. The sources we have focus really heavily on the drop in estrogen, and they use this very visceral analogy.
The parchment paper one?
Yes. They compare the vaginal tissue without estrogen to parchment paper, which sounds honestly terrifying.
I know, but the parchment paper analogy perfectly illustrates the underlying mechanism. Think about what estrogen actually does in the body. It's essentially the biological mortar, right? It keeps the cellular matrix plump, elastic, and hydrated.
So it's holding everything together and keeping it moist.
Right. So when estrogen levels plummet during and after menopause, that cellular mortar degrades. The vaginal mucosa, the lining, it becomes incredibly thin.
Right.
And the natural glands embedded in that tissue, which usually produce lubrication, they essentially go dormant. So the tissue literally feels thin, dry, and brittle.
Like parchment paper.
Exactly. And if you introduce friction to a material that resembles dry parchment paper, you don't get pleasure. You get micro tears, you get severe irritation, and sharp pain.
Ouch. Yeah, that makes complete sense. But the men are going through their own massive physiological shifts at the same exact time, right?
They absolutely are.
The sources explain that erections change from being spontaneous to becoming what is clinically called reflexogenic.
Reflexogenic.
Yes, right. But hold on, I understand muscles getting weaker over time, like your biceps or, your knees. But how does a muscle change the actual type of stimulation you need? Why wouldn't a purely visual cue work anymore?
So it really comes down to neurological thresholds. The mechanics of an erection rely heavily on two specific muscles, the bulbus spongiosus and the ischiocavernosus.
Say that 10 times fast.
Right. But when those muscles are young and at peak strength, they are highly sensitive to low-level electrical signals from the brain.
Okay, so just seeing something arousing is enough.
Exactly. A visual cue sends a relatively weak signal down the nervous system, but it's enough to trigger those strong muscles into action. It's totally spontaneous.
But as we age,
Well, as those muscles naturally lose mass and weaken with age, that low-level visual signal simply isn't strong enough to command them anymore. They require a much higher neurological threshold to fire.
oh, I see.
That is what reflexogenic means. It requires direct physical stimulation to the reflex zones.
It's like the inner thighs, the base of the penis, the testicle.
Exactly. You need that physical touch to generate a strong enough electrical impulse to trigger the physical response.
You know, I was thinking about this whole biological shift.
Yeah.
And it's honestly like trying to run a heavy, complex, modern app on a 20-year-old computer.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right, like without ever updating the operating system. You just sit there aggressively double-clicking the icon, getting more and more frustrated when it lags or crashes.
And then you blame the computer.
Exactly. You throw your hands up and yell, well, the computer's completely broken. But the hardware isn't broken at all.
No, it's not.
It just requires a totally different boot-up sequence. It needs more time, more memory allocation, just, a different process.
That analogy captures the frustration perfectly. The hardware is fully capable, but the user manual has been completely rewritten. But because most couples aren't handed this new user manual, they misinterpret the lag. And that brings us to the most dangerous part of this whole process.
The psychological sabotage.
Yes. The biggest roadblock to mature intimacy isn't the physical decline of the muscles or the thinning of the tissue. It is the psychological panic that sets in when the old 25-year-old script fails.
Which leads us straight into what the sources actually label the lazy excuse.
We see this constantly in midlife medicine. Society basically uses menopause as a lazy catch-all excuse for almost every emotional and physical shift a woman experiences.
Oh, totally. If she's irritable, it's menopause.
If she's sad, it's menopause. If her libido drops, oh, it's just menopause. But the reality is far more complex.
Right, because there's so much more going on emotionally.
Exactly. Many women in midlife aren't just dealing with a biological shift. They are drowning in a profound existential crisis. They look in the mirror and they feel society actively, aggressively pushing them out of the desirable category.
That's heartbreaking.
It is. And that creeping feeling of invisibility, it shuts down sexuality far faster and far more thoroughly than vaginal dryness ever could.
So let me push you on this a little bit because it feels like we are touching on something massive here.
Sure.
Are we just letting cultural shame masquerade as biological decline? Because it sounds to me like a massive misdiagnosis. Like we are telling people they have a medical failure when really they are suffering from a crisis of confidence.
That is exactly the distinction we need to make. We tell people their biology is failing when in reality, their confidence has been shattered by a culture that exclusively worships youth.
And it hits men too, right?
Oh, it hits men just as hard. It just manifests differently. Men are conditioned from adolescence to believe their entire sexual identity, their literal masculinity, rests on an instant, reliable erection.
So when that natural shift to reflexogenic arousal happens when there's a delay.
It is instantly internalized as a deep personal humiliation.
Right. The bedroom suddenly turns into a boardroom performance review.
Yeah.
It's a pass or fail test.
Yeah. Am I hard enough? Is my partner noticing the delay? What does this mean about me as a man?
And we know exactly what happens to the body under that kind of scrutiny, right?
Oh, absolutely. Pressure is the ultimate enemy of pleasure. The moment sex becomes a test, the autonomic nervous system shifts out of the parasympathetic state.
Which is the rest and digest state you need for arousal.
Exactly. And it shifts straight into the sympathetic state, the fight or flight response. The brain literally perceives the performance anxiety as a life-threatening threat.
Wow, a threat.
Yes. It dumps cortisol and adrenaline into the bloodstream and biologically shuts down the physical relaxation required for intimacy. Arousal just vanishes. Not because the body is old, but because the brain thinks it's in danger.
And when both partners are stuck in this silent, terrifying panic, we often see them fall into the duty sex trap.
Yes, which is so common.
Right. A woman dealing with the parchment paper reality we talked about might just endure painful sex to keep the peace or to reassure her partner, all without ever communicating her actual discomfort.
And enduring that pain is incredibly destructive. We often view it as a sacrifice for the relationship, but physiologically it is disastrous.
Why is that?
Because when a woman pushes through painful sex, the brain's neuroplasticity kicks in. She is literally training her nervous system to associate the act of intimacy with pain, tension, and threat.
Oh, man. So the brain learns to fear it.
Exactly. The brain is a highly adaptive learning machine. If sex equals pain, the brain will eventually shut down all desire for sex in order to protect the body.
So that isn't a failure of libido at all. That is the body's self-defense mechanism working perfectly.
Precisely.
Okay, so if a couple has dug themselves into this hole, like the woman has inadvertently trained her brain to fear intimacy, and the man is trapped in this brutal cycle of performance anxiety, how do we fix the psychological script? Like, what does mature intimacy actually look like when it's done right?
We have to completely redefine the menu. And this brings us to the pioneering work of sex therapist Helen Singer Kaplan, specifically her concept of sensate focus.
Sensate focus. Okay, what is that?
It's a clinical behavioral practice that takes the ultimate goalpost of penetration and completely removes it from the equation. Imagine a couple placed in a scenario where intercourse is strictly forbidden.
Forbidden, okay.
Yes, the focus shifts entirely to sensory exploration. It is just about touching, feeling, breathing, and existing in the same space without the looming expectation of a grand finale.
Oh, I see. So it essentially forces the nervous system out of that fight or flight state. You can finally breathe because the performance review has essentially been canceled.
Exactly. And it taps into a crucial physiological distinction, the difference between spontaneous desire and responsive desire.
Right, which the sources mentioned.
Spontaneous desire is that lightning bolt feeling of wanting sex out of nowhere. It's driven by high hormones and novelty, which is very common in our 20s, but it naturally fades.
And responsive desire.
Responsive desire is a slow burn. It's the phenomenon where desire only builds after touch, warmth, and emotional safety have already begun. You don't start out wanting it. The wanting emerges as a physical response to the connection.
You know, it's like we have been conditioned our whole lives to think the drive-thru is the only way to eat.
Oh, I love that.
Right, like you pull up, you want the food instantly, you get it in a paper bag, and you're done. But mature sex is realizing you finally have the time, the high-quality ingredients, and the kitchen to cook a slow, multi-course meal.
Exactly.
Penetration is just one option on the menu. It is absolutely not the entire dinner.
The drive-thru analogy is perfect. And we actually see this slower, richer dynamic reflected in art and history, too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the sources point to the film It's Complicated with Meryl Streep and Alec Baldwin.
Great movie.
It is. And the movie beautifully showcases how mental closeness, shared history, and a deep understanding of another person's mind can completely trump the superficial visual appeal of youth. Or look at Honoré de Balzac, the famous French novelist. He had a passionate 15-year romance with Laura de Burney, and she was 23 years his senior.
Wow.
True eroticism is about profound presence, not unblemished skin.
And the sources actually note something really surprising here about women specifically.
Wow.
Older women, because they know their bodies intimately and because the lifelong anxieties of accidental pregnancy or performative youth are finally gone, they can actually experience their most profound, earth-shattering orgasms post-menopause.
It's true. When the performative anxiety is stripped away and the fear of pregnancy is removed, a woman is left with pure sensation and deep self-knowledge. Her mental bandwidth is entirely focused on pleasure.
That is so empowering.
It is. But to access that pleasure, we have to talk about physical maintenance. We've redefined what sex is, but we must explore how to physically maintain the body's capacity for it.
Right, under the biological principle of use it or lose it.
Exactly. Even if you don't currently have a partner.
Well, let's dive into the neurological benefits of sex, because the data here completely blew my mind.
It's pretty incredible.
The sources detailed this massive 2016 study out of the UK. Let me just set the scene for you. Imagine you are a neurologist tracking the cognitive decline of older adults. They followed 18,000 men.
18,000.
Between the ages of 50 and 89 over an extended period. And they put them through rigorous cognitive testing, including recalling words and taking the clock drawing test, which is a standard diagnostic tool for dementia.
Right.
The differentiator for the men who scored the highest, who actually maintained their brain function, wasn't diet or crossword puzzles. It was regular sexual activity.
The underlying mechanism there is a massive chemical flood. During sexual activity, the brain is drenched in a cocktail of neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin.
It's just a huge rush.
Concurrently, there is a massive sustained increase in cerebral blood flow. It nourishes the brain tissue. One psychiatrist in the sources reviewed this data and put it very bluntly.
What do they say?
They said, if you can't learn languages, at least have sex.
Wait, I have to stop you there. Are you seriously telling me that a doctor is literally prescribing physical intimacy as a legitimate neurological workout?
I am.
We have an entire industry selling us Sudoku and brain training apps to stave off cognitive decline. But you're telling me that maintaining physical, sexual aliveness is a fundamental pillar of protecting our neurology.
It absolutely is. The nervous system requires intense, complex stimulation to maintain its pathways. And sexual arousal is one of the most complex full-body processes we have.
That is wild.
And this use it or lose it principle applies heavily to solo practice, too. For women without partners, the sources use the analogy of a wooden instrument left in its case.
Like a guitar.
Exactly. You cannot ignore a guitar in a dry closet for 10 years, suddenly take it out of its case, and expect it to play perfectly in tune the moment you aggressively strum it.
Strings would snap or just sound awful.
The wood is stiff. It needs slow, careful, methodical tuning to restore its resonance.
And the sources actually provide some incredibly specific, practical ways to tune that instrument physically, even outside the bedroom.
Yes, the physical maintenance exercises.
Let's talk about these. First, there's something called Michelin's vibrogymnastics. Now, I have to be honest, I looked at this and thought, wait, dropping my heels 1.5 inches against the floor is going to save my sex life.
It sounds a bit out there, I know.
It sounds like a late-night infomercial. How does a tiny heel drop do anything mechanically?
I understand the skepticism, but the physiology is fascinating. Alexander Michelin was an aviation engineer who applied mechanical principles to the human body.
Okay.
As we age, we suffer from physical stagnation in our lower extremities. The blood and lymphatic fluid pool in the pelvic region. So in vibrogymnastics, you stand near a wall for balance, raise up on your toes just slightly, about 1.5 centimeters, and drop your heels sharply to the floor.
Just a little drop.
Right. When you do this rhythmically, it sends a mechanical vibrational shock wave straight up through the skeletal system. This physical shock wave forces the valves in the veins to open.
Oh, wow.
And it dramatically improves lymphatic drainage and venous blood flow out of the pelvic region. It clears out the stagnation.
Okay, so we're essentially jump-starting the circulation. That makes sense. And then there's a second exercise focusing on the pelvic diaphragm. You lie down, place a half-deflated ball or a soft pillow between your knees, and do rhythmic squeezes.
Right, and this is all about the fascial network. Everything in the pelvis is connected. By squeezing your knees together against resistance, you are engaging the adductor muscles of the inner thighs.
And how does that help the pelvis?
Because those adductors are physically anchored to the pelvic floor. Engaging them directly stimulates, tones, and warms the pelvic diaphragm. It draws nutrient-rich blood flow to the reproductive organs, maintaining the tissue's elasticity and responsiveness, even if you aren't engaging in partnered sex.
Okay, so we've covered the mindset shifts, the sensate focus, the neurological benefits, and the physical exercises.
We have.
But let's be real here. Sometimes all the deep breathing, new scripts, and heel drops in the world just aren't enough.
Absolutely.
If the tissue is thinned out, friction is still going to cause pain. When the body needs tangible support, we have to open the medical toolkit. And the primary rule here is that we have to treat the vagina like skincare.
Yes. We must start with the absolute baseline lubrication. The rules from the gynecologists here are very strict. High-quality water-based or silicone-based lubricants are mandatory.
Mandatory.
Yes. They provide the necessary glide to prevent physical trauma to fragile tissue, and we have to be equally strict about what to avoid. Saliva is completely off the table.
Really?
Completely. It dries out instantly, causing friction, and it introduces oral bacteria that can cause serious infections in microtears.
Oh, yikes. And what about those novelty lubes, the flavored, warming, or minty additives?
The sources say keep them far, far away.
Good to know.
They are packed with chemical additives that will severely irritate and inflame sensitive, mature tissues.
But you know, for many women, a bottle of lubricant just isn't enough. When that vaginal mucosa has truly degraded into that fragile parchment paper state, gynecologists employ what we can call a layer cake approach.
The layer cake approach, yes. If the tissue is flat and brittle, they need to rebuild the layers. Doctors use treatments like hyaluronic acid injections or plasmolysis.
Analysis.
Yeah, that utilizes your own platelet-rich plasma. Or they can use radiofrequency lifting. Let's look at hyaluronic acid, for example. It acts like a microscopic sponge.
Okay.
A single molecule can hold 1,000 times its weight in water. So when it's injected, it binds to water, pulling in moisture to actively rebuild the cellular matrix.
That is incredible.
It really is. It turns that brittle parchment paper back into a thick, functional layer cake that acts as a healthy shock absorber during intimacy.
You know, here's where it gets so incredibly frustrating to me, because it highlights the absolute absurdity of our cultural double standards. Well, we will gladly spend a fortune slathering night creams, retinols, and $100 serums on our faces every single night.
Oh, absolutely.
We brag about it. It's self-care. But when it comes to basic dermatological care for the pelvic region, we treat it as some sort of taboo, unspeakable failure. Why on earth do we meticulously hydrate our faces but abandon the rest of our skin just because it's hidden under our clothes?
It is a profound contradiction, and the sources emphatically state that women need to treat vaginal dryness exactly like a nightly facial routine.
Just normal routine care.
Exactly. Applying specialized vaginal moisturizers or emollients a few times a week is just basic hygiene for aging tissue. Furthermore, millions of women suffer from what is clinically diagnosed as the genitourinary syndrome of menopause.
Okay, and what's the treatment for that?
For this, localized vaginal estrogen, which is a topical cream prescribed by a doctor, can be entirely life-changing.
Just the cream?
Yes. It restores the local hormonal balance directly at the tissue level without the systemic risks of full-body hormone replacement therapy. It literally brings the tissue back from the brink.
Wow. So when we put all these pieces together, the biological reality, psychological unlearning, the maintenance exercises, the medical layer cake toolkit, what is the final picture of intimacy after 50?
If we synthesize the data from all these medical and psychological sources, the core message is incredibly triumphant. Mature intimacy is not a downgrade.
Not at all.
It is an entirely different, infinitely richer language.
Yeah.
But to speak that language fluently, it requires complete paradigm shift. It requires absolute emotional honesty.
Yeah.
It requires a much slower pace. It requires proper, unapologetic medical maintenance. And most importantly, it requires leaving those frantic, performance-based 25-year-old expectations at the door.
To you listening right now, you are allowed to want. You are allowed to feel. You are allowed to fiercely enjoy your body at 50, at 60, at 70, and well beyond. Do not let cultural silence or personal shame make your medical or emotional decisions for you.
Claim your space, seek the medical care you deserve, and redefine your pleasure.
Which leaves us with one final lingering idea to chew on as we wrap up today's deep dive. We started by talking about that imaginary medieval certificate society tries to hand us to shut down our sex lives as we age.
Right.
But what if society's intense discomfort with older adults having sex isn't actually about age or gray hair or wrinkles at all? What if it's a deep-seated collective fear of a pure, liberated intimacy? An intimacy that relies on absolute vulnerability, truth, and profound connection, rather than hiding behind the shiny, heavily filtered armor of physical perfection. Think about it.
If you enjoyed this, drop a comment and hit like. It really helps. You can also support the channel using the link below or the QR code on your screen.